at kind of the premises behind Marietta's ideological scheme and taking a look at the tree. So we're going to divide this into two more segments and take a look at the conservative ideology and then the liberal ideology and try to apply that a little bit to some individual case studies for public policy. So let's start with the conservative premises. So at the bottom of the tree here, the little ideology tree with the branches and the core values and the central problem, we have the premise for conservatism, which is human nature is bad, anti-utopianism, and fragility. So let's take a look at that and see what Marietta actually means. So from the vantage point of fragility, essentially what Marietta means is that, in society, things can break down pretty easily. And from the conservative perspective, there are both internal and external enemies. So if we're taking a look at the United States, there can be those people outside of the country that for whatever reason want to challenge our American way of life and our system. So in contemporary American culture, at least since 2001, one of those kind of external enemies that we would focus in would be on terrorists. And from the conservative vantage point, that might be Islamic terrorists. It might be changing our way of life from a religious viewpoint, taking away our freedoms, whatever the case may be. What might be a little bit less easy to understand is the idea of internal enemies. And they can, in many respects, be cultural enemies who don't understand the kind of conservative values. So one way to think about this would be, if you've ever watched the show The Jersey Shore, if you can think about the type of characters that are on the Jersey Shore, and think about the types of lives that these people live and what their ultimate goals in lives are, right? And generally, their goals in life are to have fun, to do whatever is good for them as individuals and not to worry too much about society. So they're examples of kind of an internal threat to the United States, that these are very selfish individuals who aren't focused on doing what's good for everyone. Now, what you see with the idea of fragility is basically things degenerate over time. In general, conservatives believe that there was kind of one really good period at one point in time, and that was probably at the point of the founding. The founders created a perfect system, and since then, basically, we've gone downhill. Democratic societies particularly are vulnerable to this fragility because of the fact that we believe in the idea that everyone's equal. Therefore, everyone's kind of ideas about how to live life and different values are on an equal plane as opposed to having one person's or the right set of values being the dominant political culture. The second kind of premise for conservatives is the idea of human nature. And basically focusing on human nature, they believe that, not that we're bad people, but that we're generally selfish, generally interested in what's good for us without really being concerned about how what we do affects other people, right? So selfish aggressiveness, as you see here, and that's really unchangeable. So we can't be perfected. So if you've ever read the book The Lord of the Flies or watched the movie at some point over your career, probably in high school or college, what you saw in that book was that there was a group of stranded English students who landed on an island, and everything they'd been taught in the English kind of imperial culture system went by the wayside as they became kind of just natives on this island and lost all of their social values. It's a perfect kind of conservative book. That human nature, ultimately, we will kind of regress back towards an area in which we don't have any kind of values or social mores. And as a consequence of that, we need to continue to be taught these things. And then finally, conservatives believe in what we can call an anti-utopian impulse. So if human nature is essentially bad, society's fragile, there's no real way to reach the state of perfect perfection, right? We can't perfect society given those other kind of premises. And if you take a look at this, essentially what you see is that, anytime that we've tried to make a utopian system, it's always made things worse, right? And, their examples would be things like communism, both in the Soviet Union or in China, the Great Leap Forward, and the Cultural Revolution. Take a look at fascism, both in Nazi Germany and in Italy. And really, we can't really change things all that much because human nature cannot change. And oftentimes when we do try to make large changes, there are a lot of unintended consequences, which at the end of the day actually don't make things better, they make things worse. And basically what we want to do if we go through life is to make things slowly a little bit better, try things out, but don't try radical change. All right? So those are the underlying premise for conservatives. So the question then becomes, what is the core value that holds all of this together? And the core value of conservatism is essentially the idea of ordered liberty. Right? So we have to balance freedom, because in a free society you're allowed to do what you need to do in order to be able to achieve your objectives. But at the same time, we have to, as individuals, also realize that there are limits on the types of behaviors that we can engage in. Right? So you see the definitions here. Freedom with decency. Yes, I can do whatever I want, but I have to be good to other people. Liberty without license. Yes, I could do whatever I want, but I should do the right thing. And we have to find those kind of balances between our individual freedoms in a free society and our personal responsibilities to other people, and the objective be able to behave correctly, right? So limits are very important, right? So if you think about that, things like not stealing from other people, not being a burden on society because I don't work, not creating rules of the game that are unfair so that I can win and you will automatically lose. We should all kind of compete on an even playing field. So, if you think about this, basically all that freedom's out there, but we should live lives that are decent and moral according to the conservative core values, right? So, decorum, be civilized, respect other people, and really a regard for human excellence. We should always try to be the best people that we possibly can be. And I think the underlying thing here is that just because you can get away with something doesn't mean that you should do it, right? And I think from that vantage point, the conservative core value is, yes, law is a minimum standard in order to be able to maintain order within society, but the law is a minimum standard, and we should behave higher than the minimum standard because that's the way societies are successful. So what's the essential problem then, if we've got these kind of two premises and values? Well, the central question for conservatives is the idea of the glue problem, right? We want people to be free. We want people to have freedom, and they should use that freedom to good ends, and that should be to help other people and to maintain a decent society. But if you have too much liberty, people are going to naturally devolve into some sort of a system in which they only help themselves and they do what's good for themselves at the expense of society. So think about that. Society is always kind of in danger of flying off and spinning off out into control. So for conservatives, the idea is the glue problem. How do we do something that holds everybody together? How do we hold society together? What is the magic kind of elixir that will hold everything together? And that is the question of the glue problem. So that's where we see basically four different kind of branches of conservatism that have developed in order to be able to answer the question of the glue problem. And if you take a look at here, we've got national defense conservatives, social conservatives, economic conservatives, and cultural conservatives. And looking through those four things, what we notice is that some of these things are not mutually exclusive. In other words, if you took a look at many conservatives, they would be different strands of these combined. So it's not uncommon, for example, to see cultural and social and natural defense conservatives together, or economic conservatives and national defense conservatives together, right? What you might not see is people that are tended to be more kind of libertarian, who would be economic conservatives and national defense conservatives, but might not be cultural or social conservatives. So what does this all mean? So for national defense, the way that we hold everybody together is that we believe in the United States as being a nation that has a purpose. And patriotism, service to the country, belief in the country is something that holds us all together. That's the glue that holds us together. For social conservatives, essentially religious values are what holds us all together. If we had shared common religious values, that restrains our behavior, so at the end of the day, we all behave in a correct manner based on a religious value. And for many conservatives, particularly those people in the United States that are also cultural conservatives, Christianity would be the means to do that. But traditionally, it's also kind of been the Christian Judeo values. Economic conservatives essentially believe that if we have private property in the United States, that will force people to be better. You will take care of your own property. You will attempt to be able to achieve in life and not be in a burden on other people because you can keep the fruits of your labor. If I can keep the fruits of my labor, I will therefore want a more stable society because, again, thinking about this, I have succeeded, I will want to continue to other people to succeed, and private property kind of gives us a stable life. And then finally we have the cultural conservatives, which in some respects are kind of offshoots of social conservatives, but not everybody that's a cultural conservative is necessarily religious. So there are certain things as a country that bind us together, right? And those traditions are what make us Americans, and those traditions are what we should look to kind of keep us together as a nation. So, part of that might be something relative to national defense, celebrating national holidays like July 4th, the Independence Day, celebrating Thanksgiving, saying Merry Christmas instead of saying Happy Holidays, having a traditional nuclear family. These are all kind of cultural traditions. And when you start to break down these traditions, what you're ultimately doing is you're lessening the glue that holds us all together. Therefore, these things are very important. That's the importance of saying Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays for a cultural conservative is a fundamental value that you're challenging about the way society should interact with each other. And just a quick couple of things here to take a look here. So to summarize these four things, for national defense conservatives, essentially it's a dangerous world out there, right? And militarism is important. The willingness to use military force around the world to protect American values is very important. The enemy is pacifism, right? For social conservatives, we could summarize that, or Marietta summarizes that as being God is great, right? So the main kind of conflict in American society would be religious values versus secularism. And secularism, as it would win in their eyes, means a loss on the other side. Economic conservatives, you can keep what you earn, right? Essentially the idea of me as an individual being able to keep what I earn versus an enemy, which would be somebody that's more communitarian, meaning that we should kind of, quote unquote, spread the wealth, right? That would be something that would violate these premises. And then finally, the idea of cultural conservatives, to summarize them, tradition is a good thing, right? And what we do is that society starts to break down when we allow people to do whatever they want and get away from these traditions and to get outside of the traditional institutions which have held society together, right? So those are very important. As you see there, immigration is a primary issue for people that are cultural conservatives. Why? Because you're letting people in that don't necessarily have the traditional values that they believe hold society together. So these are kind of the underlying ideas behind Marietta's discussion of this idea of conservatism, and we will take a look a little bit more later about liberals.